This is going to be a book review over Tex Watson's first book, but I didn't type up anything, so this is going to be kind of freelance. So, this is my book review, though, for Will You Die For Me by Tex Watson. Overall, I would say that it was a pretty interesting book. I guess I would probably give it maybe about 3 out of 5. It is kind of average in some ways because when it comes straight down to it, there are things in Tex's story that you would have hoped he would have explained more upon, and of course of which he didn't. The first thing I think of that, of course, is a negative to his book is his description of the Tate and LaBianca murders. But what really stuck out to me was how Tex would, just like Susan Atkins in her book of Child of Satan, Child of God, Tex also referred to the victims just as the Tate woman, the Folger woman, which first of all made me think, okay, he most definitely read Susan's book before, making his own. But at the same time, too, just like Susan, not referring to these people by their actual names, not saying Sharon Tate, Abigail Folger, Leno LaBianca, Rosemary LaBianca, all of those people of which he killed. That just shows his own inhumanity and how honestly far removed he still was almost 10 years after the murders. Of course, with Tex's book, just like Susan's, there comes the question of his veracity in religion and the veracity of, more like the question of, okay, was this book just created because you really hoped to get parole, And once again, I have to say yes. I think, first of all, that this book was only created this book definitely was created just to make Tex look like a victim of Charles Manson and to hopefully get him parole. Now, I don't really know very much about Chaplain Ray Hoekstra. I kind of got the vibe that Chaplain Hoekstra was kind of just trying to latch on to something, of course, big, a big killer, a big case, but sometimes religious people like that too. They, for some reason, really think that they can change homicidal maniacs, which of course you can't. Now, just like a lot of people have questioned, Susan's faith, they would question Tex's too. And while I do think that in some ways Susan Atkins believed in God, while I believed that Susan Atkins probably believed in God but wasn't actually committed to the religion, I do not believe at all that Tex Watson really believed and really wanted to, be a minister and all that, he pretty much said it. They both said it in their books where it's like, okay, either you turn to religion or you go insane. If you turn to religion, it'll look better on your parole. I think it had stated in one of their books, it pretty much said that. And I was like, I can't believe you would even admit that. How can you say that in your book, hope to go to the parole board, get parole, and actually expect to be set free after putting that in your book? To me, that just put right then and there, that proved like, oh, okay, of course, most definitely, no question of a doubt, he was just doing the whole religion thing to, of course, look good for the parole board. And that's my huge thing I dislike about this book, where it most definitely is show offy, arrogant, and conceited. The end of the book, just like Susan's, has, all that Bible shit in it. And I don't know what sane person would read Tex Watson's book. Tex Watson, the serial killer. Not that people seem to call him that very much, but he is a serial killer. Why would I turn to this guy's book for guidance? I don't see what sort of fulfillment I could gain from his religious scrawlings at the end of the book. I don't believe that. I don't think I could find myself to become a better person from somebody that killed multiple people. I just don't believe that at all. Tex's conversion to the Christianity faith most definitely was just something to make him seem like a pious and well-adjusted individual. And to me it was apparent that he is just one of these people that have deep-rooted mental problems, because he couldn't see through that. For some reason, to this day, this review is coming out in 2021, so, in 2021, he is still alive, and he just had a parole hearing, which of course he was denied. But to me, I don't understand how, if you were truly sorry for what you did to all these people 50 years ago, why would you even go to the parole hearing? If you were sorry, you wouldn't feel like you should be set free, right? And I say that Tex Watson must have some sort of mental condition, maybe like, he would have to have antisocial personality disorder, because he just literally cannot see how transparent he is. He is so easy to look through. People like him, you can see their intentions from the start, and they're cons, but they're bad cons. They think that they can pull a fast one on you, but any regular person who has lived on their own will know otherwise. And and that's the thing I don't like with the book too, is that even though on one hand Tex did convey how much he was a drug addict, that is actually a good point, that he did talk about his use of drugs actually quite a lot. But on the other hand, he didn't talk about his other crimes. He was just as much a con man as the others before Tate LaBianca. Now, if you go with the Bible of Manson mythos and literature being Helter Skelter by Bugliosi, you won't hear that, you won't read that, you won't see how most of these other people like Tex Watson were doing other crimes before the murders. But pretty much any other piece of literature will tell you that Tex Watson was pretty much, he was a drug dealer way before the murders. And you can definitely tell at times in the book where he's lying, because for some reason in his book he would be like, oh, well, it wasn't more than that, it wasn't more than this, it was just this, it was just that. Okay, it was just this small minuscule thing, right? But how convenient you say that, how convenient you don't admit to your other crimes, such as dealing drugs. At least not as much as he really did, around the time he would have that parole hearing. How convenient, right? But, and other people have asked this before in the past, and I have my questions too. What what would really bring a man? I just don't understand. I mean, am I from a different time period so I just can't get it? But I mean, why would a guy like Tex Watson, especially a big country boy footballer kind of type, a huge jock, a country hick jock like that, why would he go work at a wig shop? Why would you go to California and sell wigs? I know that he wanted to get out of Texas, fair enough, but I just don't understand why you would sell things that are like ultra feminine. I don't get that. Granted, at the same time, too, I understand like 50 years ago, there was, I don't know, kind of like a weird dynamic where certain things were sold by men, even though you would think it would have been by a woman, but even still, nonetheless, I have heard that those wig shops he worked at were just fronts for drugs. And honestly, I could believe that. I believe that a lot. I think that with Texas minimalization of certain situations like that, moving to his own little house, to have his own little wig shop and crap like that. I think it is all just to make that seem so small and make him seem just like a country bumpkin guy, He's just a regular dude. And then Charles Manson took advantage of him, And that's the thing I just don't believe, I don't get. Once again, I do believe, just because of the timing of when this came out, I don't believe at all that these things that he acted like weren't as serious as they really were, or integral to the situation in his life. I don't believe that they were just nothing, and that's the main theme of this book, where just kind of like Susan, he tries to convey himself as a pious, hunky-dory individual. He's just about Texan hospitality, Like, no, I don't believe that at all. You can't blame Charles Manson for making you kill all those people. I don't believe that at all. And I do believe that there are chunks missing from the story to even explain the events leading up to him meeting Charles Manson. Because even in comparison between this book and Paul Watkins's book, I'm like, okay, so there's some holes in the story. I know how it goes, but according to you guys, your stories don't really add up, and the timeline doesn't make sense. At what time does Tex Watson enter the family and the story, and then we have Paul Watkins, and where does this all kind of mesh up together? And one thing I kind of found weird in general is how Tex really didn't talk so much about other people. I mean, I know that it's his story, but he didn't really he didn't really convey much information about other people. But I do find it very interesting, kind of had to laugh when reading about his little snippets here and there about Susan Atkins, because it's just, with the exception of Paul's book, oh my God, every single piece of literature has always conveyed Susan Atkins as just the most disgusting, attention whore type of girl. I mean, for real, like, it makes me laugh. Every single book that talks about her will say that she was just a sour person. So to see that in Tex's book, especially after Susan's, was so funny to me. I mean, literally, it was funny. In some ways, I liked the shortness of the story because it didn't dilly-dally with stupid details that were absolutely pointless, like Paul's book. There wasn't descriptions of the mustard weed on the Panamint Ridge, and we walked over the alluvial fan. Like, nobody cares about that bullshit. Just get to the point. We want to hear about the murders. But at the same time, text doesn't really tell us about the murders. It was such a gray and mechanical description of it. Really, if you were to read his book to find out anything of it, you wouldn't. He really didn't tell you anything that you wouldn't already know, And that's the thing that is such a shame, because I feel like most people that would read this book would do so because you would at least want to see what was going through his mind when he killed multiple people, And I don't believe for a minute that you can just blame drugs and you can blame Charles Manson. I think that Charles Manson was the type of person who saw the cracks and creaks and the broken parts of an individual, and he preyed upon that. And that's kind of why, going into this part of the section, I don't really believe, that's what I say, like, this entire review is just, I don't believe it. I don't believe this, right? But, I mean, I guess you could say statistically, there's no reason to believe that Tex Watson had an all right childhood. I mean, honestly, seriously, it doesn't make sense, because if Tex Watson had this beautiful, hunky-dory, mid-century childhood, he was the football star and the track star and all this bullshit, and he had unprotected sex and shit, why would you kill people? I mean, that's what I think. Why would you kill people? When studying psychology, I've read a lot about how there's a lot that is genetic, but there's also a lot that's environmental. So in some ways you could potentially say, oh, well, maybe he was just born that way. Maybe he was born with a disorder that, of course, would cause a person to kill people. But I don't believe that is ever the one sole answer. I feel like there is also always multiple answers to everything. There are multiple reasons as to why something happens. And of course, with Tate LaBianca, there are plenty of different, theories with that alone, of which I think those multiple theories actually tie in with each other for things to have turned out the way they did, And so I don't believe that Tex Watson had that hunky-dory childhood he was talking about, because it doesn't add up as to why he would kill people. But, of course, that's because I know Charles Manson wasn't the only reason why Tex killed people. You know what I mean? Because I mean, maybe you could kind of tell with my videos, but I wholly subscribe to the drug theory. I mean, it makes sense. That's the only one that makes sense to me. Of which, the theory is that Jay Sebring and Wojtek Frykowski, and if not one of them, depending on what you've read, but in the very least, Wojtek Frykowski was a drug dealer dealing out of Cielo Drive, and basically the Tate murder was part of a drug burn, and Sharon Tate wasn't even supposed to be there, and this and that. So to me, that makes more sense as to why Tex would have killed all those people in that house that night, because as people have said, once you start dealing with the underworld, you're gonna see underworld things, and drugs are such an underworld dealing. I mean, you can still hear about that kind of stuff today. If you look in the news, people getting murdered because of, honestly, drugs and drug deals gone bad. So And then it's like, well, if there was just a drug deal, then what about the LaBiancas? And I've heard that there's stuff like with the LaBiancas and mafia ties. I don't know how true that is. I'm still waiting on my book from Nicholas Schreck. So, we'll see into that. But then, you kind of think, is that mafia stuff bullshit or is it real? Because Paul Watkins said in his book a little bit about, oh, there's mafia people, no. But anyway, I'm getting off point. So, really, my main thing is that there's a lot of things that Tex said, and then, of course, didn't say, that just didn't make sense. Do I think that Tex had the best childhood? Not really. I don't think he probably had a horrible childhood, but once again, we don't know what really happened, and we'll never know because the guy is a liar and he will never tell the truth. And but I do think that his parents had to have been good people, because after the murders, his parents were so ashamed, and this is just real life. This isn't even from the book, but his father, who owned a shop in this super small town, basically erased that town from history. And I was doing some looking not long after reading the book, so at this time about a couple of months ago from this review, but the church that Tex had talked about going to growing up, I believe it was the Methodist church, I think, quote unquote, doesn't exist anymore. Now I say quote unquote because this church, it does exist, but it just won't, it doesn't share the same name it did when he was growing up. Another thing that they scrubbed from history, because I'm sure there's people obviously to this day that go to like Farmersville and Copeville to see like, oh my God, this is where Tex Watson came from, kind of stuff. And those people don't want anything, of it. They don't want anything to do with it. And so the Methodist church in that area doesn't have that same name. And, and I looked, because I'm from Texas, and so, I know like about like county websites and sources and stuff. And so I went onto that county website and their little history stuff, and it was scrubbed from there too. Now, this church still exists, but if you look it up on the county website, they don't even list it. They don't list it. And this is in 2021, 52 years after the murders. So Texas actions has still affected that area to this day. And of which, George Stimson just started posting videos on YouTube, and I watch them. I think they're interesting. And he said something that is just so true, and I really agree with. At the beginning of this book by Tex, he essentially says that he apologizes for his foolishness, of which that in itself is so absurd to me. Your foolishness? You fucking killed people. You killed an unborn child. And that's the worst thing to me. You killed a child who was past the age of viability. That kid would have lived if you just left Sharon Tate alone. And you call that foolish? Killing a pregnant woman is foolish? That's not even anywhere near the strength. That word has nowhere near the strength of what you think it means. That is so minuscule in comparison to the depravity of these events. And of which, so in George Stimson's video talking about Tex, he pointed out how Tex called his actions foolish. And if you were to go to the cemetery, and you could look it up on Find a Grave, because I looked it up too. If you look up the graves for Tex's parents, his parents were embarrassed until the day they died. They are embarrassed even after death, of what their child had done. Because, they're Watsons. And despite being in the family grave, there are, I believe, rose bushes that cover their headstones. And then on top of that, their headstones are reversed from where you would usually put them in a cemetery. So I guess it must have been in their wills or something, but Tex Watson's parents were so embarrassed that he killed people and an unborn child that they made their graves, their headstones, almost unseeable after death. And Tex has the audacity to say he was foolish. And that is honestly such a good point that George Simpson made, and I really do agree with it. It shows the disconnect of just the disconnect from him in the situation, of how much he doesn't think it's as serious as it really is. I didn't really understand why Tex was just sort of running around the world after the murders. And then felt the need to go back to California. I mean, if what he said was really true, I just think it's honestly astonishing that he was able to fly to different places and even go to Hawaii before being imprisoned. But yet I don't understand why. Just literally, like, why would he keep going around like that too? I mean, in his mind or his book, he tried to act like he was just so brainwashed by Charles Manson that he just didn't know better. He didn't know what to do. So he was just meandering around, of which, if he was really meandering, I don't understand why you would fly all the way to Hawaii, So either he didn't understand that, maybe you should just run away from the law and hide, or in reality what was really happening was that he was running and he was on the lam, but he doesn't want to admit to that either. Truthfully, I don't really see any reason why you wouldn't believe that Tex Watson wasn't a drug dealer even before getting with Luella and dealing drugs with her, of which that whole part of the story just showed how much of a shitty person he was and is. But if he set her up to to really believe that he was being truthful and then still, screwed her over in this drug burn, how could you, I just feel like, how could you not think that he didn't already do that kind of stuff before? How could he just so easily plan a drug burn and get off with it the first time, with Bernard Crowe? And yet at the same time too, that was like first time ever. I've never really been a drug dealer. I don't believe that either. In a weird way, I would say, to read the book. Of course, if you're deep enough in the Charles Manson rabbit hole, I think it is worth the read. It's not very long and it's not very hard, and of course, for me, I only read everything for the sake of completion. But if you're just actually reading it and not listening to the audio thing I did, you could probably finish it in like a day. I read half of it in one sitting. It's only like 100 pages, so it's not long at all. But of course, with things like this, like Charles Watson's and Susan Atkins's books, you just have to use critical thinking when it comes to these things, because ultimately these are pieces of literature to make themselves look better and not necessarily tell the truth. In a weird way, there are good parts to this story. I actually did like reading about his childhood, honestly, at least of what he said of it, because it was just a different kind of point of view, and just having any sort of information about that with him was just kind of nice, where in such a weird way with the Tate LaBianca murders and Charles Manson, for some reason the public doesn't ever hear about Charles Watson. And some people feel like we should call these the Watson murders. And honestly, I agree. Or at least we need to put Tex Watson in the area he should be. For some reason we don't call him a serial killer, but that is literally what he is. Whether it was because of a drug burn or a crazy religious cult. Either way, the fact is that he killed people, and he did it on his own volition. And whether he was brainwashed or not, you can't necessarily blame someone else entirely for that. Later in the book, of course, he talks about if he was faking or not, insanity or some sort of other mental disorder, so that he could probably get off free. Now, Tex claims that he was just so drawn in and sullen and robotic like, I guess you could say, after murdering all the people. But he wasn't faking. And in some ways I could see that to be true, because if you have any sort of humanity, hurting, I couldn't imagine taking away life, and so if somehow I managed to do that, I would be so upset, but at the same time too, if I accidentally hurt somebody, I couldn't do it like 7 more times. That's where the truthfulness of this whole thing comes into question. I believe it was Bugliosi who had stated that he believed that Charles Watson was just acting like he was crazy or dumb or insane in order to get the insanity plea. And despite Tex saying, no, that's not true, that's just how I just was in shock. Truthfully, that's up for you to believe, up to you to decide. I guess I just don't really feel any way about that either way, mostly just because I know that even if someone really is batshit crazy, it's still very hard to get the insanity plea. That's just a part of our criminal justice system. So, like I said, I just don't really have an opinion on that one either way. I mean, I do think he's crazy in his own way, but I believe he was fully cognizant, though, too, of when he killed all those people. I mean, you had to be, really. So, anyway. Somehow this ended up being a lot longer than I expected it to be, and as always, I always appreciate your viewership, or I guess listening-ship. You don't have to watch these, you can just listen, but either way, of course, I just want to say thank you, and I appreciate each and every one of you. I don't do these just because I feel like I have to. I actually do all of this because I want to, and I love to. I love doing this. So as always, thank you. And if you disagree with me, that's fine. And if you agree with me, that's okay too. I don't want you to feel like you have to believe what I do or think the way I do, because that's just not how this works at all. This is literally my opinion, and I just want you to know it. So anyway, thank you, and I hope you have a good day.